The story of the three bears. Once upon a time, there were three bears who lived together in a house of their own in a wood. One of them was a little, small, wee bear, and one was a middle-sized bear, and the other was a great, huge bear. They had each a pot for their porridge, a little pot for the little, small, wee bear, and a middle-sized pot for the middle bear, and a great pot for the great, huge bear. And they had each a chair to sit in. A little chair for the little, small, wee bear, and a middle-sized chair for the middle bear, and a great chair for the great, huge bear. And they had each a bed to sleep in. A little bed for the little, small, wee bear, and a middle-sized bed for the middle bear, and a great bed for the great, huge bear. One day, after they had made the porridge for their breakfast, and poured it into their porridge pots, they walked out into the wood, while the porridge was cooling, that they might not burn their mouths by beginning too soon to eat it. And while they were walking, a little old woman came to the house. She could not have been a good, honest old woman, for at first, she looked in at the window, and then she peeped in at the keyhole, and seeing nobody in the house, she lifted the latch. The door was not fastened, because the bears were good bears, who did nobody any harm, and never suspected that anybody would harm them. So the little old woman opened the door and went in. And well pleased she was when she saw the porridge on the table. If she had been a good little old woman, she would have waited till the bears came home, and then, perhaps, they would have asked her to breakfast. For they were good bears, a little rough, or so, as the manner of bears is, but for all that very good-natured and hospitable. But she was an impudent, bad old woman, and set about helping herself. So first she tasted the porridge of the great, huge bear, and that was too hot for her, and she said a bad word about that. And then she tasted the porridge of the middle bear, and that was too cold for her, and she said a bad word about that too. And then she went to the porridge of the little, small, wee bear, and tasted that, and that was neither too hot nor too cold, but just right. And she liked it so well, that she ate it all up. But the naughty old woman said a bad word about the little porridge pot, because it did not hold enough for her. Then the little old woman sate down in the chair of the great, huge bear, and that was too hard for her. And then she sate down in the chair of the middle bear, and that was too soft for her. And then she sate down in the chair of the little, small, wee bear, and that was neither too hard nor too soft, but just right. So she seated herself in it, and there she sate till the bottom of the chair came out, and down came she, plump upon the ground. And the naughty old woman said a wicked word about that too.
Then the little old woman went upstairs into the bedchamber in which the three bears slept. And first she lay down upon the bed of the great, huge bear, but that was too high at the head for her. And next she lay down upon the bed of the middle bear, and that was too high at the foot for her. And then she lay down upon the bed of the little, small, wee bear, and that was neither too high at the head, nor at the foot, but just right. So she covered herself up comfortably, and lay there till she fell fast asleep. By this time the three bears thought their porridge would be cool enough, so they came home to breakfast. Now the little old woman had left the spoon of the great, huge bear, standing in his porridge. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the great, huge bear in his great gruff voice. And when the middle bear looked at his, he saw that the spoon was standing in it too. They were wooden spoons. If they had been silver ones, the naughty old woman would have put them in her pocket. "Somebody has been at my porridge," said the middle bear in his middle voice. Then the little, small, wee bear looked at his, and there was the spoon in the porridge pot, but the porridge was all gone. "Somebody has been at my porridge, and has eaten it all up," said the little, small, wee bear in his little, small, wee voice. Upon this the three bears, seeing that someone had entered their house, and eaten up the little, small, wee bear's breakfast, began to look about them. Now the little old woman had not put the hard cushion straight when she rose from the chair of the great, huge bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the great, huge bear in his great, rough, gruff voice. And the little old woman had squatted down the soft cushion of the middle bear. "Somebody has been sitting in my chair," said the middle bear in his middle voice. And you know what the little old woman had done to the third chair. Somebody has been sitting in my chair and has saved the bottom of it out, said the little, small wee bear in his little, small wee voice. Then the three bears thought it necessary that they should make farther search. So they went upstairs into their bedchamber. Now the little old woman had pulled the pillow of the great, huge bear out of its place. Somebody has been lying in my bed, said the great, huge bear in his great, rough, gruff voice. And the little old woman had pulled the bolster of the middle bear out of its place. Somebody has been lying in my bed, said the middle bear in his middle voice. And when the little, small wee bear came to look at his bed, there was the bolster in its place, and the pillow in its place upon the bolster, and upon the pillow was the little old woman's ugly, dirty head which was not in its place, for she had no business there. Somebody has been lying in my bed, and here she is, said the little, small wee bear in his little, small wee voice. The little old woman had heard in her sleep the great, rough, gruff voice of the great, huge bear, but she was so fast asleep that it was no more to her than the roaring of wind or the rumbling of thunder. And she had heard the middle voice of the middle bear, but it was only as if she had heard someone speaking in a dream. But when she heard the little, small wee voice of the little, small wee bear, it was so sharp and so shrill that it awakened her at once. Up she started, and when she saw the three bears on one side of the bed, she tumbled herself out at the other and ran to the window. Now the window was open, because the bears, like good, tidy bears, as they were, always opened their bedchamber window when they got up in the morning. Out the little old woman jumped, and whether she broke her neck in the fall, or ran into the wood and was lost there, or found her way out of the wood and was taken up by the constable, and sent to the house of correction for a vagrant as she was, I cannot tell, but the three bears never saw anything more of her.
The Three Little Pigs. There was once upon a time a pig who lived with her 3 children on a large, comfortable, old-fashioned farmyard. The eldest of the little pigs was called Brownie, the second Whitey, and the youngest and best-looking Blackie. Now Brownie was a very dirty little pig, and I am sorry to say spent most of his time rolling and wallowing about in the mud. He was never so happy as on a wet day, when the mud in the farmyard got soft and thick and slab. Then he would steal away from his mother's side, and finding the muddiest place in the yard, would roll about in it and thoroughly enjoy himself. His mother often found fault with him for this, and would shake her head sadly and say, "Ah, Brownie, some day you will be sorry that you did not obey your old mother." But no words of advice or warning could cure Brownie of his bad habits. Whitey was quite a clever little pig, but she was greedy. She was always thinking of her food and looking forward to her dinner. And when the farm girl was seen carrying the pails across the yard, she would rise up on her hind legs and dance and caper with excitement. As soon as the food was poured into the trough, she jostled Blackie and Brownie out of the way in her eagerness to get the best and biggest bits for herself. Her mother often scolded her for her selfishness and told her that someday she would suffer for being so greedy and grabbing. Blackie was a good, nice little pig, neither dirty nor greedy. He had nice dainty ways for a pig, and his skin was always as smooth and shining as black satin. He was much cleverer than Brownie and Whitey, and his mother's heart used to swell with pride when she heard the farmer's friends say to each other that someday the little black fellow would be a prize pig. Now the time came when the mother pig felt old and feeble and near her end. One day she called the 3 little pigs round her and said, "My children, I feel that I am growing old and weak, and that I shall not live long. Before I die, I should like to build a house for each of you, as this dear old sty in which we have lived so happily will be given to a new family of pigs, and you will have to turn out. Now, Brownie, what sort of a house would you like to have?" "A house of mud," replied Brownie, looking longingly at a wet puddle in the corner of the yard. "And you, Whitey?" said the mother pig in rather a sad voice, for she was disappointed that Brownie had made so foolish a choice. "A house of cabbage," answered Whitey, with a mouthful, and scarcely raising her snout out of the trough in which she was grubbing for some potato parings. "Foolish, foolish child," said the mother pig, looking quite distressed. And you, Blackie, turning to her youngest son, what sort of a house shall I order for you? A house of brick? Please, mother, as it will be warm in winter and cool in summer, and safe all the year round. That is a sensible little pig, replied his mother, looking fondly at him. I will see that the 3 houses are got ready at once. And now one last piece of advice. You have heard me talk of our old enemy the fox. When he hears that I am dead, he is sure to try and get hold of you, to carry you off to his den. He is very sly, and will no doubt disguise himself and pretend to be a friend, but you must promise me not to let him enter your houses on any pretext whatever. And the little pigs readily promised, for they had always had a great fear of the fox, of whom they had heard many terrible tales. A short time afterwards the old pig died, and the little pigs went to live in their own houses. Brownie was quite delighted with his soft mud walls and with the clay floor, which soon looked like nothing but a big mud pie. But that was what Brownie enjoyed, and he was as happy as possible, rolling about all day and making himself in such a mess. One day, as he was lying half asleep in the mud, he heard a soft knock at his door, and a gentle voice said, "May I come in, Master Brownie? I want to see your beautiful new house." "Who are you?" said Brownie, starting up in great fright. For though the voice sounded gentle, he felt sure it was a feigned voice, and he feared it was the fox. "I'm a friend come to call on you," answered the voice. No, replied Brownie. "I don't believe you are a friend. You are the wicked fox, against whom our mother warned us. I won't let you in." "Oh ho! Is that the way you answer me?" said the fox, speaking very roughly in his natural voice. "We shall soon see who is master here." And with his paws he set to work and scraped a large hole in the soft mud walls. A moment later he had jumped through it, and catching Brownie by the neck, flung him on his shoulders and trotted off with him to his den. The next day, as Whitey was munching a few leaves of cabbage out of the corner of her house, the fox stole up to her door, determined to carry her off to join her brother in his den. He began speaking to her in the same feigned gentle voice in which he had spoken to Brownie, but it frightened her very much when he said, "I'm a friend come to visit you, and to have some of your good cabbage for my dinner. Please don't touch it," cried Whitey in great distress. "The cabbages are the walls of my house, and if you eat them you will make a hole, and the wind and rain will come in and give me a cold. Do go away. I am sure you are not a friend, but our wicked enemy the fox." And poor Whitey began to whine and to whimper, and to wish that she had not been such a greedy little pig, and had chosen a more solid material than cabbages for her house. But it was too late now, and in another minute the fox had eaten his way through the cabbage walls, and had caught the trembling, shivering Whitey, and carried her off to his den. The next day the fox started off for Blackie's house, because he had made up his mind that he would get the 3 little pigs together in his den, and then kill them, and invite all his friends to a feast. But when he reached the brick house, he found that the door was bolted and barred. So in his sly manner he began, "Do let me in, dear Blackie. I have brought you a present of some eggs that I picked up in a farmyard on my way here." No, Mr. Fox," replied Blackie. "I am not going to open my door to you. I know your cunning ways. You have carried off poor Brownie and Whitey, but you are not going to get me." At this the fox was so angry that he dashed with all his force against the wall and tried to knock it down, but it was too strong and well built, and though the fox scraped and tore at the bricks with his paws he only hurt himself, and at last he had to give it up and limp away with his forepaws all bleeding and sore. "Never mind," he cried angrily as he went off. "I'll catch you another day. See if I do. And won't I grind your bones to powder when I have got you in my den?" And he snarled fiercely and showed his teeth. Next day Blackie had to go into the neighboring town to do some marketing and to buy a big kettle. As he was walking home with it slung over his shoulder, he heard a sound of steps stealthily creeping after him. For a moment his heart stood still with fear, and then a happy thought came to him. He had just reached the top of a hill and could see his own little house nestling at the foot of it among the trees. In a moment he had snatched the lid off the kettle and had jumped in himself. Coiling himself round, he lay quite snug in the bottom of the kettle, while with his foreleg he managed to put the lid on, so that he was entirely hidden. With a little kick from the inside he started the kettle off, and down the hill it rolled full tilt. And when the fox came up, all that he saw was a large black kettle spinning over the ground at a great pace. Very much disappointed, he was just going to turn away when he saw the kettle stop close to the little brick house. And in a moment later Blackie jumped out of it and escaped with the kettle into the house. When he barred and bolted the door and put the shutter over the window, "Oh ho!" exclaimed the fox to himself. "You think you will escape me that way, do you? We shall soon see about that, my friend." And very quietly and stealthily he prowled round the house looking for some way to climb onto the roof. In the meantime Blackie had filled the kettle with water, and having put it on the fire, sat down quietly waiting for it to boil. Just as the kettle was beginning to sing, and steam to come out of the spout, he heard a sound like a soft, muffled step. Patter, patter, patter overhead. And the next moment the fox's head and forepaws were seen coming down the chimney. But Blackie very wisely had not put the lid on a kettle, and, with a yelp of pain, the fox fell into the boiling water. And before he could escape, Blackie had popped the lid on, and the fox was scalded to death. As soon as he was sure that their wicked enemy was really dead, and could do them no further harm, Blackie started off to rescue Brownie and Whitey. As he approached the den he heard piteous grunts and squeals from his poor little brother and sister who lived in constant terror of the fox killing and eating them. But when they saw Blackie appear at the entrance to the den their joy knew no bounds. He quickly found a sharp stone and cut the cords by which they were tied to a stake in the ground. And then all three started off together for Blackie's house, where they lived happily ever after. And Brownie quite gave up rolling in the mud, and Whitey ceased to be greedy, for they never forgot how nearly these faults had brought them to an untimely end.
The War of the Wolf and the Fox. There was once upon a time a man and his wife who had an old cat and an old dog. One day the man, whose name was Simon, said to his wife, whose name was Susan, "Why should we keep our old cat any longer? She never catches any mice nowadays, and is so useless that I have made up my mind to drown her." But his wife replied, "Don't do that, for I'm sure she could still catch mice." "Rubbish," said Simon. "The mice might dance on her, and she would never catch one. I've quite made up my mind that the next time I see her, I shall put her in the water." Susan was very unhappy when she heard this, and so was the cat, who had been listening to the conversation behind the stove. When Simon went off to his work, the poor cat meowed so pitifully, and looked up so pathetically into Susan's face, that the woman quickly opened the door and said, "Fly for your life, my poor little beast, and get well away from here before your master returns." The cat took her advice, and ran as quickly as her poor old legs would carry her into the wood. And when Simon came home, his wife told him that the cat had vanished. "So much the better for her," said Simon. "And now we have got rid of her, we must consider what we are to do with the old dog. He is quite deaf and blind, and invariably barks when there is no need, and makes no sound when there is. I think the best thing I can do with him is to hang him." But soft-hearted Susan replied, "Please don't do so. He's surely not so useless as all that." "Don't be foolish," said her husband. "The courtyard might be full of thieves, and H'd never discover it. No, the first time I see him, it's all up with him, I can tell you." Susan was very unhappy at his words, and so was the dog, who was lying in the corner of the room, and had heard everything. As soon as Simon had gone to his work, he stood up and howled so touchingly that Susan quickly opened the door, and said, "Fly for your life, poor beast, before your master gets home." And the dog ran into the wood with his tail between his legs. When her husband returned, his wife told him that the dog had disappeared. "That's lucky for him," said Simon, but Susan sighed, for she had been very fond of the poor creature. Now, it happened that the cat and dog met each other on their travels. And though they had not been the best of friends at home, they were quite glad to meet among strangers. They sat down under a holly tree, and both poured forth their woes.
Presently, a fox passed by, and seeing the pair sitting together in a disconsolate fashion, he asked them why they sat there, and what they were grumbling about. The cat replied, "I have caught many a mouse in my day, but now that I am old and past work, my master wants to drown me." And the dog said, "Many a night have I watched and guarded my master's house, and now that I am old and deaf, he wants to hang me." The fox answered, "That's the way of the world, but I'll help you to get back into your master's favor. Only you must first help me in my own troubles." They promised to do their best, and the fox continued, "The wolf has declared war against me, and is at this moment marching to meet me in company with the bear and the wild boar, and tomorrow there will be a fierce battle between us." "All right," said the dog and the cat, "we will stand by you, and if we are killed, it is at any rate better to die on the field of battle than to perish ignobly at home." And they shook paws and concluded to bargain. The fox sent word to the wolf to meet him at a certain place, and the three set forth to encounter him and his friends. The wolf, the bear, and the wild boar arrived on the spot first, and when they had waited some time for the fox, the dog, and the cat, the bear said, "I'll climb up into the oak tree and look if I can see them coming." The first time he looked round he said, "I can see nothing," and the second time he looked round he said, "I can still see nothing." But the third time he said, "I see a mighty army in the distance, and one of the warriors has the biggest lance you ever saw." This was the cat, who was marching along with her tail erect. And so they laughed and jeered, and it was so hot that the bear said, "The enemy won't be here at this rate for many hours to come. So I'll just curl myself up in the fork of the tree and have a little sleep." And the wolf lay down under the oak, and the wild boar buried himself in some straw, so that nothing was seen of him but one ear. And while they were lying there, the fox, the cat, and the dog arrived. When the cat saw the wild boar's ear, she pounced upon it, thinking it was a mouse in the straw. The wild boar got up in a dreadful fright, gave one loud grunt, and disappeared into the wood. But the cat was even more startled than the boar, and spitting with terror, she scrambled up into the fork of the tree, and as it happened right into the bear's face. Now it was the bear's turn to be alarmed, and with a mighty growl he jumped down from the oak, and fell right on the top of the wolf, and killed him as dead as a stone. On their way home from the war the fox caught score of mice, and when they reached Simon's cottage he put them all on the stove, and said to the cat, "Now go and fetch one mouse after the other, and lay them down before your master." "All right," said the cat, and did exactly as the fox told her. When Susan saw this, she said to her husband, "Just look, here is our old cat back again, and see what a lot of mice she has caught." "Wonders will never cease," cried Simon. "I certainly never thought the old cat would ever catch another mouse." But Susan answered, "There, you see, I always said our cat was a most excellent creature, but you men always think you know best." In the meantime, the fox said to the dog, "Our friend Simon has just killed a pig. When it gets a little darker, you must go into the courtyard and bark with all your might." "All right," said the dog, and as soon as it grew dusk, he began to bark loudly. Susan, who heard him first, said to her husband, "Our dog must have come back, for I hear him barking lustily. Do go out and see what's the matter. Perhaps the youths may be stealing our sausages." But Simon answered, "The foolish brute is as deaf as a post, and is always barking at nothing," and he refused to get up. The next morning, Susan got up early to go to church at the neighbouring town, and she thought she would take some sausages to her aunt who lived there. But when she went to her larder, she found all the sausages gone, and a great hole in the floor. She called out to her husband, "I was perfectly right. Thieves have been here last night, and they have not left a single sausage. Oh, if you had only got up when I asked you to." Then Simon scratched his head and said, "I can't understand it at all. I certainly never believed the old dog was so quick at hearing." But Susan replied, "I always told you our old dog was the best dog in the world, but, as usual, you thought you knew so much better. Men are the same all the world over." And the fox scored a point too, for he had carried away the sausages himself.
The three dogs. There was once upon a time a shepherd who had two children, a son and a daughter. When he was on his deathbed, he turned to them and said, "I have nothing to leave you but 3 sheep and a small house. Divide them between you, as you like. But don't quarrel over them, whatever you do." When the shepherd was dead, the brother asked his sister which she would like best, the sheep or the little house. And when she had chosen the house, he said, "Then I'll take the sheep and go out to seek my fortune in the wide world. I don't see why I shouldn't be as lucky as many another who has set out on the same search. And it wasn't for nothing that I was born on a Sunday." And so he started on his travels, driving his 3 sheep in front of him. And for a long time it seemed as if fortune didn't mean to favor him at all. One day he was sitting disconsolately at a crossroad when a man suddenly appeared before him with 3 black dogs, each one bigger than the other. "Hullo, my fine fellow," said the man. "I see you have 3 fat sheep. I'll tell you what. If you'll give them to me, I'll give you my 3 dogs." In spite of his sadness, the youth smiled and replied, "What would I do with your dogs? My sheep at least feed themselves. But I should have to find food for the dogs." "My dogs are not like other dogs," said the stranger. "They will feed you instead of you them, and will make your fortune. The smallest one is called Salt, and will bring you food whenever you wish. The second is called Pepper, and will tear anyone to pieces who offers to hurt you. And the great big strong one is called Mustard, and is so powerful that it will break iron or steel with its teeth." The shepherd at last let himself be persuaded and gave the stranger his sheep. In order to test the truth of his statement about the dogs, he said at once, "Salt, I am hungry." And before the words were out of his mouth, the dog had disappeared and returned in a few minutes with a large basket full of the most delicious food. Then the youth congratulated himself on the bargain he had made and continued his journey in the best of spirits. One day he met a carriage and pair, all draped in black. Even the horses were covered with black trappings, and the coachman was clothed in crape from top to toe. Inside the carriage sat a beautiful girl in a black dress crying bitterly. The horses advanced slowly and mournfully, with their heads bent on the ground. "Coachman, what's the meaning of all this grief?" asked the shepherd. At first the coachman wouldn't say anything, but when the youth pressed him, he told him that a huge dragon dwelt in the neighborhood and required yearly the sacrifice of a beautiful maiden. This year the lot had fallen on the king's daughter, and the whole country was filled with woe and lamentation in consequence. The shepherd felt very sorry for the lovely maiden and determined to follow the carriage. In a little it halted at the foot of a high mountain. The girl got out and walked slowly and sadly to meet her terrible fate. The coachman perceived that the shepherd wished to follow her and warned him not to do so if he valued his life, but the shepherd wouldn't listen to his advice. When they had climbed about halfway up the hill, they saw a terrible-looking monster with the body of a snake and with huge wings and claws coming towards them, breathing forth flames of fire and preparing to seize its victim. Then the shepherd called, "Pepper, come to the rescue," and the second dog set upon the dragon. And after a fierce struggle bit it so sharply in the neck that the monster rolled over, and in a few moments breathed its last. Then the dog ate up the body, all except its 2 front teeth, which the shepherd picked up and put in his pocket. The princess was quite overcome with terror and joy and fell fainting at the feet of her deliverer. When she recovered her consciousness, she begged the shepherd to return with her to her father, who would reward him richly. But the youth answered that he wanted to see something of the world, and that he would return again in 3 years, and nothing would make him change this resolve. The princess seated herself once more in her carriage and, bidding each other farewell, she and the shepherd separated, she to return home, and he to see the world. But while the princess was driving over a bridge, the carriage suddenly stood still, and the coachman turned round to her and said, "Your deliverer has gone, and doesn't thank you for your gratitude. It would be nice of you to make a poor fellow happy. Therefore you may tell your father that it was I who slew the dragon, and if you refuse to, I will throw you into the river, and no one will be any the wiser, for they will think the dragon has devoured you." The maiden was in a dreadful state when she heard these words, but there was nothing for her to do but to swear that she would give out the coachman as her deliverer and not to divulge the secret to anyone. So they returned to the capital, and everyone was delighted when they saw the princess had returned unharmed. The black flags were taken down from all the palace towers, and gay-colored ones put up in their place. And the king embraced his daughter and her supposed rescuer with tears of joy and, turning to the coachman, he said, "You have not only saved the life of my child, but you have also freed the country from a terrible scourge. Therefore, it is only fitting that you should be richly rewarded. Take, therefore, my daughter for your wife, but as she is still so young, do not let the marriage be celebrated for another year." The coachman thanked the king for his graciousness, and was then led away to be richly dressed and instructed in all the arts and graces that befitted his new position. But the poor princess wept bitterly, though she did not dare to confide her grief to anyone. When the year was over, she begged so hard for another year's respite that it was granted to her. But this year passed also, and she threw herself at her father's feet and begged so piteously for one more year that the king's heart was melted, and he yielded to her request, much to the princess' joy, if she knew that her real deliverer would appear at the end of the 3rd year. And so the year passed away like the other 2, and the wedding day was fixed, and all the people were prepared to feast and make merry. But on the wedding day it happened that a stranger came to the town with 3 black dogs. He asked what the meaning of all the feasting and fuss was, and they told him that the king's daughter was just going to be married to the man who had slain the terrible dragon. The stranger at once denounced the coachman as a liar, but no one would listen to him, and he was seized and thrown into a cell with iron doors. While he was lying on his straw pallet, pondering mournfully on his fate, he thought he heard the low whining of his dogs outside. Then an idea dawned on him, and he called out as loudly as he could, "Mustard, come to my help." And in a second he saw the paws of his biggest dog at the window of his cell, and before he could count to the creature had bitten through the iron bars and stood beside him. Then they both let themselves out of the prison by the window, and the poor youth was free once more, though he felt very sad when he thought that another was to enjoy the reward that rightfully belonged to him. He felt hungry too, so he called his dog Salt and asked him to bring home some food. The faithful creature trotted off and soon returned with a table napkin full of the most delicious food, and the napkin itself was embroidered with a kingly crown. The king had just seated himself at the wedding feast with all his court, when the dog appeared and licked the princess' hand in an appealing manner. With a joyful start she recognized the beast, and bound her own table napkin round his neck. Then she plucked up her courage and told her father the whole story. The king at once sent the servant to follow the dog, and in a short time the stranger was led into the king's presence. The former coachman grew as white as a sheet when he saw the shepherd, and, falling on his knees, begged for mercy and pardon. The princess recognized her deliverer at once, and did not need the proof of the 2 dragons' teeth which he drew from his pocket. The coachman was thrown into a dark dungeon, and a shepherd took his place at the princess' side. And this time, you may be sure, she did not beg for the wedding to be put off. The young couple lived for some time in great peace and happiness, when suddenly one day the former shepherd bethought himself of his poor sister, and expressed a wish to see her again, and to let her share in his good fortune. So they sent a carriage to fetch her, and soon she arrived at the court, and found herself once more in her brother's arms. Then one of the dogs spoke and said, "Our task is done. You have no more need of us. We only waited to see that you did not forget your sister in your prosperity." And with these words the 3 dogs became 3 birds and flew away into the heavens.